You know what time it is. Let's upgrade those tiny stock turbos, well, those tiny stock Australian delivered turbos, to some good old JDM turbos. Okay, we're going to do it a little bit differently this week. We're going to start from the newest turbos and work our way back to the oldest. Just because when we go this way, it's a bit easier to explain the sizing of different turbos and where they came from. So we'll start with the JDM Peanut and Hawkeye STIs, which came with the VF37, which was a twin scroll turbo, which in Australia we did not receive. We only had the single scroll turbos. But in Japan, they got, luckily, the VF37, which was a very quick spooling turbo and held power pretty well. The one after that is probably the most sought after turbo. We used to get questions about this turbo every day when we wrecked, asking if we had one or if we knew when we were going to get another one, which was the VF34. This only came out on the Type RA Spec Cs, I believe just the Bug-Eye, but this turbo was pretty much your all-rounder. It was a ball bearing turbo that held power. So it was able to spool up very quick and get around 200-ish kilowatts, 210-ish kilowatts on 98. I personally ran one of these turbos on my GC8 and I had about 205 kilowatts of the wheels, and I absolutely loved it. It was a nice, quick, punchy little turbo, and yeah, you can't complain. But if you couldn't afford the VF34, because it back in the day always cost over $800, and even still to this day you can't really find a second-hand one for less than $800. You can still buy them brand new for about, I think it's about $1,600, so $1,600, but don't quote me on that, have a look around, but yeah, they are still available brand new. Like I said, if you couldn't afford this though, your next best option was always the VF30, which was pretty much the exact same as the VF34, but instead of being ball bearing, it was journal bearing. And the difference between journal and ball bearing was only a couple of hundred RPM, so you still had the top end power, but it was just slightly laggier. And these came on the JDM Bug-Eye STIs. So not the fancy model, just your base model STI. And as I said last week, I mentioned the VF34 and VF30. These are both comparable to the modern day VF48 and VF43. So if you were to get the VF48, it is pretty much just a updated version of the VF34. And same as the VF43, it is just the more modern, updated version of the VF30. So both are amazing turbos. So if you can't find a VF34 for a reasonable price, keep an eye out for a VF48. And the same with the VF43, where, like I said, they're pretty much making the same amount of power, you just lose a slight bit of RPM. Next turbo is probably one of the biggest turbos I believe Subaru made. Like, these boys were lag monsters, but gee did they put out some power, which were the VF22s. And if you can't guess which car they came on, it was the 22B. The reason they made so much horsepower was for the fact they had the P20 housing, which was slightly larger than what was to come on the VF30 and the VF34, which both only had a P18. So it was a slightly smaller housing on the 34 and 30, so you couldn't make as much top-end horsepower because it started to become restrictive. Whereas the VF22, what you lost in spool time, you gained in top-end power. The VF22 was also a great turbo for people to upgrade to because it was extremely easy to modify. So one of the ways you could reduce the lag on them was by putting one of the 11-blade billet wheels on the inducer side, which would make it nearly spool as quick as a VF34. It was just insane, and I've had lots of mates running these, making well and truly over 200 kilowatts at the wheels. So if you can find one, they are amazing, but the thing you need to remember is they are a very old turbo, and I don't believe they make brand new ones of these anymore, unlike the VF34. So just keep an eye out, and if you do find one, make sure you check the condition. But like I said, don't worry, because you can change the internals and upgrade them to make them perform amazingly. So now, when I get to the next two turbos, it kind of makes more sense as to why I started with the newer ones and worked my way to the older ones. So the VF24, it was off the version 4 STIs, and it was a ball bearing turbo, but it was slightly smaller than the VF34. So it was comparable to it, but it didn't make as much top end. So it was, again, the VF34 was pretty much a updated version of the VF24. The next turbo, the VF23, again, off the version 3 STI, it was a journal bearing, so again, comparable to the VF30, but the difference was it had the larger rear housing of the P20. So it made a bit more top end, therefore it was a bit close. It was like an in-between turbo between the VF30 and VF34. It made a bit more top end, but it just still was slightly slower on the spool up time. And the final turbo, which we talked about a fair bit last week, but like I said, it is still one of my favorite turbos, is a TD05 16G, which came on the version 1 and version 2 STIs, and there's nothing you can really say. They were just an amazing turbo that I don't understand why Subaru got rid of, but what can you do? What's done is done. But yeah, if you've enjoyed this, make sure you join us at 7:30 PM on Thursday, where we do our live stream over on 3P Garage, on Facebook, Twitch and YouTube, where we talk Subarus, get our customers in and have a chat about their cars and pretty much whatever comes to our mind that day. Also, if you've liked this kind of content, please like, comment, share and subscribe. Thanks guys. See yous. Rightio guys, make sure you join me next week where I talk about some really cool aftermarket turbos and some of the most common go-to turbos that our customers used to run on their cars and what I ran, and just I'll give you some visual sizing differences next week. Alright, see yous.